Can everyone hear me okay? I'm going to assume that's a yes. Hi, my name is Claire Menke. I'm the head of UX research at Udemy, which is an online teaching and learning company. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a little bit if you're not quite familiar. I'm a former field anthropologist and have spent the last few years transitioning into industry and now building out a team at Udemy. So it's been an awesome experience, and I'm excited to share with you some of the learnings that I've had of doing research at Udemy over the last few years. So here we go. First, I wanted to say thank you to everyone for dealing with all the technical difficulties last week and for joining me today. Again, I'm going to go through my theory and sort of at Udemy how we have become a place where we have mixed and matched foundational research frameworks. So jobs to be done, journeys, and personas. To start off, I'd love if everyone could participate in a little bit of a poll. I'm curious to see if you could raise your hands through the raise hands option. How many people have created personas? Give you a minute. Number of hands gone up, great. How about jobs to be done? Who has done jobs to be done? Fewer hands, not a surprise. And how about journeys or journey maps of some sort? Great, wonderful. Well, thank you. That sort of helps me understand where everyone is. I want to start off by first giving you a little bit of a look into Udemy and UX research, sort of set up the scene, and then talk you through how we went about mixing and matching foundational research frameworks, and then wrap up at the end with some thoughts on how to consider starting this kind of work in your organization. So Udemy, for those of you who aren't familiar, is an online teaching and learning platform where we believe that every student can find their right teacher. So we operate as a marketplace. So people who have knowledge in their brains, experts in their field, often working professionals, can record themselves sharing their knowledge and distribute it through the Udemy platform to students around the world. Currently, we have about 30,000 instructors and about 20 million students worldwide. I believe at last count, we have students in over 192 countries, which is pretty amazing. And because of this marketplace model, it makes it a very interesting place to do research. And it also means that we have so much variety. We have over 65,000 courses here at Udemy and all sorts of topics from yoga and meditation to one of my favorites, which is sourdough bread making, through professional topics. So this could be programming or Excel, building a business, things like that. User experience research at Udemy is a function that's about 3 years old. We've evolved over those 3 years and started as a very small centralized team of one, aka myself, and have now grown to a team of 5, soon to be 6. And we currently have a dedicated research team member within each major product area within the product organization. So it's really great. We get to work very closely with product manager and designer pairs, but we do at the same time have an open door to the rest of the company for anyone who doesn't have a sort of direct service or a direct researcher to help get their questions answered. Overall, we take a very mixed method approach. Intentionally, I've set up the organization that way. And so that gives us a lot of flexibility and freedom to play around with these different types of research methodologies, suggest different options, and make it a more dynamic place to do the work that we do. While currently we're a team of 5, soon to be 6, at the time most of this research was done, we were very small. So either 1 or 2 researchers. So keep that in mind as I sort of talk through this process and also talk through how you can do this in your own organization. It is possible to do these big foundational research pieces as a small team. It is more challenging and probably takes a little bit longer, but gives you a little bit of a frame as to how we were able to successfully do this at Udemy. So the challenge at the point when we started embarking on developing a foundational understanding of our users was that we really didn't have a unified or a holistic understanding of each of these user groups. So for the case of this discussion, I'm going to focus mostly on the students. At the time that we started doing this work, we had a better understanding of who our instructors were, but overall did not really have a grasp as to who they are, what they were doing, why they were here. And so that was a huge piece that they brought me in to help figure out. We also discovered through the process of doing this research that every department and every sort of business function was responding to different types of data and different types of research outputs. And I'll explain that as we go through. But this was the key reason as to why we ended up mixing and matching multiple foundational research frameworks, because people were grabbing onto different pieces of information and utilizing those in slightly different ways. So that is the key factor that really helped this evolve. So the goals and why we started embarking on building this foundational research approach was, one, we wanted to build a really unified narrative of user understanding. So anyone at the company could say, this is who this user group is, this is what they like, this is what they dislike, here are their points of pain and joy, and really build a common and unified belief around that. The second was, the beauty of being a platform where we believe anyone can find their right teacher and their right student is that we tried to build for everyone. And in the process of building for everyone, we lost the ability to design for any one person. So my goal was to sort of help the company focus its efforts on a specific target user or target user group within that larger set. So, one target student persona or one target instructor persona, something like that, to really make sure that we could design effectively for particular groups of people. And lastly, my big driver was making sure that we had customer empathy throughout our product, throughout our business decisions. So through building that unified narrative and focusing efforts, really help the company think through who these users are when making business decisions. So those were the goals of why I decided to embark on this foundational research. We ended up sort of stumbling through a lot of trial and error, this foundational research framework that integrated several pieces of larger research. So, personas, jobs to be done, and journeys in this case. This is just my example. I'm sure that you can find other types of foundational research that you could integrate together. But these were the ones that we ended up choosing and working with, and I'll explain how in a little bit. So how did we arrive at this solution? I guess I'm starting now. First was we started with personas. So in this case, and I'm going to focus on the student user group for the entirety of this presentation. So in this case, a persona was something that we built on both a market segmentation or a market understanding, as well as attitudes and behavioral overlay. So really focusing on that average sentiment towards learning and how learning affects his or herself in a very large sense. So it ended up being primarily attitudinally based, and we found a lot of distinctions between people who believed in learning and thought learning was something very valuable to them and more growth mindset individuals, as well as people who didn't see that value or it didn't play as large of a role in their life. So this high level attitude and belief towards learning was central to how and why people decide to approach Udemy. And so that's part of why we started with the persona. The other reason we started with the persona is because it was actually already in progress when I joined the company. We actually ended up doing personas twice as an organization. The first time we did personas, that's what was in progress when I joined Udemy. We started with a fully qualitative persona endeavor and discovered that that was not the way our company was comfortable responding to qualitative research. We ended up deciding to leverage quantitative data through a market segmentation and layer on qualitative data to make it more comfortable and also leverage the term personas, which was already familiar in the organization and something that people were saying they wanted, but make it something that was palatable and sort of transition the company into more qualitative data. So that's why we started with personas. And out of personas, like I mentioned, we ended up with a market segmentation with this qualitative sort of attitudinal behavioral overlay on top of, what is their gender balance, what are their age ranges, how much on average do they spend on learning a year, things like that. And we used a consultant to help make those traditional market segmentations. And so it was something that was very, very tactical and something that was very data driven that the company could really hold on to. And through creating those personas, it helped force the conversation at the organization about, okay, these are the 5 to 10 different groups that we have, are types of learners, large attitudinal areas. Which one do we believe we want to focus on? And so it was really able to focus our company on that one direction. And through that, I ended up achieving one of my main goals, which was great. But at the same time, I was handed a little bit of a reality check in that I thought, this one apple, this one piece of research could solve all my problems. Great. It took a little while to realize that it actually didn't. I discovered that the marketing team loved personas. That was something that they were very comfortable with, our brand team in particular. It was something they were familiar with and were used to and thought could bring a lot of color to how they present Udemy and how we think through our students. The product team, on the other hand, was having a hard time connecting these large sentiments to why is someone here today? And so the challenge became for me, how do I add useful nuance to support the product team's goal of understanding how and why people arrive on Udemy and go through their experience without losing this big piece of work that I had just rolled out to the entire company, that our marketing and brand teams were really holding on to and really valuing and getting a lot of work out, getting a lot of use out of. So I was trying to navigate both of those worlds and ended up stumbling upon Jobs to be Done, actually through one of the product managers at the company at the time. Jobs to be Done I know this is something that's come up in research circles in the last couple of years. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's the idea that people hire products or services to achieve a sense of progress or to achieve a particular outcome in their life. So whatever their situation is and whatever they are motivated by dictates those product choices and decisions about what they will use, when they will use it, etc. So in the context of Udemy, you have this persona, this average sentiment towards learning. And depending on that average sentiment, the discrete situations you might find yourself in that will trigger you to learn may be different based on those your innate belief in learning. If you are, super passionate, lifelong learner, growth mindset, you find a lot of opportunities to learn. Learning solves a lot of your problems. If you, maybe are not so thrilled about learning, it's something that you're not as comfortable with, or you struggle with, or it's not something you enjoy, you're going to find fewer situations in which learning is the thing that you turn to. So why Jobs to be Done and why in that layer with personas, under personas? I really liked it because it focused on that cause and effect. That what is your situation right now and what does that cause you to do through the motivation and the sense of progress you're trying to achieve. And that was actually super helpful to connect the personas to why they chose Udemy. That was so helpful for our product team. And the other thing that I liked is it facilitated a further nuancing of who our personas are and why they're here. So we discovered through this process one persona. So we focused most of our Jobs to be Done on our key persona, and we found that they have multiple reasons they could come to Udemy. And so this forced the discussion. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. That forced the discussion of, okay, that's great. We have this persona. They have, 3 to 6 10 different reasons why they could be here today or why they could use Udemy. Which one do we want to capitalize on and which one do we want to focus on as a business? The other thing I liked is we discovered that multiple personas, while they can share some jobs, often have some unique jobs based on their innate sense of where learning fits in their lives. So, a lot of people have a similar job of, I need to learn a skill for my business or for my professional development. That makes a lot of sense. Most people have jobs, and so that's a kind of known quantity. But, someone who, go back to my previous example, someone who is a lifelong learner, they may have a plethora of other jobs that they are trying to accomplish through learning, where, someone who is not as interested in learning or someone who only learns when they're asked to or struggles with learning, they will have fewer jobs in which they turn to learning. So it really helps demonstrate that nuance within personas and also across personas. So like I mentioned before, the output of adding the jobs to be done layer underneath personas was that it helped us really refine our focus from, one target persona to, hey, here are a couple of the target reasons why they're here on Udemy, and made it much more tangible for our product team. But of course, it's never quite as easy as it seemed. That was great. But the product team really wanted to put a magnifying glass to these key moments and these key jobs to be done. They wanted to know, how are we currently performing against our key personas' primary jobs to be done, or primary and secondary. So basically, how well are we doing now? We now know all of this sort of baseline information about who they are, why they're here today. How are we actually meeting those expectations? And so that's where we added in the journey. The journey map is focused on the experiential journey that a user goes on once they actually land on a product or a tool, and how well that tool actually meets their needs and their expectations. So it really added another layer of granularity after you go from that key persona to the couple of 1 to 2 jobs to be done within that persona, and then you can really focus on what is that baseline experience for people who are trying to accomplish a specific jobs to be done. So again, why do we include the customer journey? It really helps us set that baseline of current user experience. And we're actually playing with, making that a benchmark. So using some sort of a customer journey as a benchmark to understand, as we develop our product, as we develop new features, how are we doing for our key personas and in helping them accomplish those specific jobs to be done. It also helped the product team prioritize their efforts. You can't do everything. That's just not possible. And so finding those really high points of high and the low points of pain really helped the product team think through, what is our strategy and what are we going to do to maximize the experience for these specific jobs to be done. And it also, I think the thing that I really liked and sort of the crux of the empathy goal is that knowing what you're doing and why you're prioritizing that particular piece, laddering all the way up to what is the reason this person is here in the first place, how do they believe about, or what are their beliefs about learning? It really reinforces that continual focus on customer empathy and questioning, okay, are we doing the correct thing for our users? So I love having that customer journey as sort of that baseline piece and deciding, okay, what are the products and the features that we're focusing on? How is that helping? Why is that helping that accomplish the needs of our users? So the final output of that customer journey map was the baseline experience map for the key jobs to be done. And like I mentioned, prioritizing features without losing the larger user narrative. I think this last piece was something that was particularly useful for our design team because they, are very familiar with personas and enjoy understanding and making sure that the creative solutions they're developing are meeting the needs of the users and filling that larger existential why in a very tactical way. So this I thought was very useful. And so now we have this foundational research framework and we're able to skip off into the Emerald City. Of course, there are always bumps and trials along the way, but I think it's really helped us understand that the attitudes of our users shape the situations in which they learn or choose to learn. And that is what determines overall their user experience. If you're someone who is not loving learning, the experience that you may have with a particular product that you're choosing to learn on may not be great just because of that initial framework, that frame of mind that you're in. So thinking through some of those cause and effect relationships, all the way from that persona level to, okay, that drives why they might be looking and why they're here today, and also dictates what does that experience look like and how does that feel for them. So overall, this is the foundational research approach we came across or we developed. Again, this was something that happened very organically as I sat through and I thought through what are the needs of our team right now and what would they respond to best, because not everyone responds to the same type of data or the same level of data at any given time. So that's all great in theory. Let's look at a hypothetical. Let's look at what this might look like in practice. Developed this pseudo or this fake persona for you guys to give you an example. So let's pretend we have this persona of the new wave entrepreneur. So this is someone who is building a business, tends to be more female, or demographically skews female, and are self-identify as sort of an entrepreneur and someone who has that mindset. On Udemy, they may over-index on business, entrepreneurship, and marketing courses and are very self-motivated for those professional learning goals. May not have time for personal learning, and they really value that bang for buck because they're bootstrapping it. They have to learn quickly so that they can get the business off the ground, or the business may not survive. So those are some of the focuses of this particular persona. They think learning definitely can help, very self-motivated to find it, but it needs to provide that value very quickly. This particular person, let's say this is an evolution for this woman in the picture. She maybe had several moments, that sort of macro moments, that dictated certain reasons why she might come to learn at any given time. So the first might be, hey, she decides she hates her day job and wants to find a new opportunity or build a new company for herself where she doesn't have to be tied to someone else. She could be her own boss. So that might lead her down a certain set of learning journeys, maybe listening to podcasts and Tim Ferriss and thinking through, okay, do I want to build a business? How do I build a business? Eventually, maybe she quits her day job and decides to start her own company. So that leads down a different path of micro learning moments. Okay, I've decided I want to do this. How do I actually build a business plan? How do I make that pitch deck? How do I get funding? How do I do all these things to make my own company? And then, the jobs change. She continually goes back to learning because that's one of the foundational characteristics of her persona. But, maybe as the company grows, she has to absorb new responsibilities and learn new skills in order to continue to be successful in this role as entrepreneur, manager, and boss. So let's take the quit her job to be done. And maybe one of the key moments is she realized she needs to make a business plan. So she's a little apprehensive, also a little excited. She's thinking, I have a lot of skills I need to learn. I'm not sure what to do in order to pull this off. She's looking through some Facebook groups that she's a part of as, female entrepreneurs Bay Area or something like that, and sees an ad for a Udemy course and says, oh, this is cool. Maybe this is a place that I can learn some of these skills. She's a little hesitant, but also excited. Ends up arriving on Udemy and sees, oh my gosh, there are 300 entrepreneurship courses. This is really cool, but which one do I take? So again, very excited, but also a little bit overwhelmed. Let's say this is the biggest pain point in her journey. Up to here, she's been, kind of building excitement, things are good, and then it hits her how much she still has to learn. And so she ends up deciding which one she wants to take, sign up, it's easy. I don't know if you've done that on Udemy, it's very easy. And then starts finally taking her class. And she realizes, oh, they have all of these things that let you control how you learn. So she puts it on 2x speed, she gets through the information really quickly, is super engaged, and comes away with a solid business plan through one of our courses, and has this big moment of high and big moment of joy that, you know what, this worked. This helped me get to that sense of progress that I wanted of, oh, I need to learn a new skill. I need to learn how to build a business plan so that I can be successful in this job. And my journey through this product helped me do that. So that could be an example of what a new wave entrepreneur's learning journey can look like. So again, going from that average sentiment of learning is great, I need it to be efficient, and I have to, bootstrap my way, I'm going to do this, this is great. As a persona to, there are these micro moments where learning is probably more helpful. Building a business plan was one of those. And she ended up finding a product where she could do that. Some apprehension and ups and downs along the way, but ended on a high, let's say, in this example, and overall had a good experience on that product. So again, looking at sort of the theory to the applied, again, focusing on those attitudes first, which shape those situations or those jobs to be done, which determines the user's experience or has a large effect on the user's experience in the long run. So that's what it looks like in practice, or in theory, I guess. So you're probably still wondering, okay, is this right for me? Is this something that I should be embarking on? And if you decide, this is something you want to do, the next question is, how do I get started? What do I do to actually develop this and make this a reality? So I don't believe in one-size-fits-all approaches. I don't believe that there is any one particular way to do research or to build this kind of framework and understanding. So I'm going to give you a series of steps that I usually go through on any project, but particularly for these kinds of larger research pieces, to give you some things to think about as you're deciding, okay, what is right for me? So the first step I always take is I do a self-assessment. I always check my own bias and I think, why do I want to do this piece of research? Why do I want to, in this case, build a foundational research framework? Is it because I think it would be cool? Is it because I want to look good? Is it because there's an actual business need? So I always do that sort of bias check to make sure that I'm doing this for the right reasons. I'm doing it to move the business forward and add something to our user empathy and overall company culture. The next step I do is a stakeholder assessment. So I have continual tabs on my stakeholders. I'm always meeting with them and trying to understand, what do they value? What do they want? What do they respond to? In the case of this particular example, marketing was responding great. And I was getting a lot of really positive signals from them about the personas. But when I checked in with the product team, they were struggling and they were having a hard time. So doing that kind of stakeholder assessment, understanding what they want and need, is hugely, hugely valuable. I also don't believe in doing research without some sort of stakeholder buy-in. And so the next step I always do is make sure that I have that buy-in. I believe that if you don't have a business case for it, and if you don't have buy-in from, especially when doing these kinds of large pieces, if you don't have the buy-in from the top, it makes it really hard to actually get this to embed in the company culture and get people to believe it and follow through and actually use this piece of work. So the other thing I always consider is not all of your favorite or your best stakeholders are the same thing as a strategic stakeholder. The last company I was in, there was a one person who was very gung-ho about research, but it happened to be the person that no one listened to. And so I was going off of the assumption that, oh, someone is buying in, then that must mean everybody is buying in, but that wasn't the case. And so always do a check and make sure that the person who is advocating for you is the person that you need to have in your corner in order to be successful with this piece of research. Then once you have that buy-in, you know roughly what stakeholders want. Do they want attitudes? Do they want tactics? Do they want cause and effect? Then do your research assessment. Understand, what do you already know? What do you need to know? You may have the customer journey already done. You know, maybe that's a piece that you guys did a long time ago or in the recent past, and leverage that. You know, use that to think through, okay, what is the next layer that we need to add on here? Is that general attitudes and sentiments towards your product or towards the thing that your product is solving? So maybe you go all the way up to personas. It could be that you look through, again, through your customer journey data and you discover, hey, there's actually sort of a couple of micro journeys. So there are trends that may indicate that you have different types of people getting different things out of your product. And so that might be a signal to you, hey, let's just go one layer up. Let's go to jobs to be done and see if we can tease that apart and see how that traces to the customer journey. So do that understanding and understand what research has already been done before, you know, going out and reinventing the wheel. And the last step I like to do is resource assessment. So you know you want to do it. You want to do it for the right reasons. It's bringing your business forward and helping them progress. You know the type of information that your stakeholders would respond best to, and that you have that buy-in from that person that people listen to. You know, have done your check to make sure you're adding new things to the table. And then the last step is to figure out, how much time do you have? How much money do you have? How do you, you know, leverage the resources available to put your best foot forward and really make this a successful endeavor? You know, we ended up, for jobs to be done, actually bringing in a consultant. You know, part of that was time. I didn't have a lot of time at that particular moment. We were a team of 2 serving a company of 300. There wasn't a lot of that to spare. The other reason was because people had been listening to me for a couple of years, and I'd kind of become sort of like the parent. And I could sense that people really needed to hear a different voice telling the same message, but in a slightly different way. So it helped to bring in sort of the fun uncles. And so we actually brought in a group called the Rewired Group, who are big into jobs to be done and great consultants, by the way. And so they helped sort of bring that to life, partially because I didn't have the time, but also because, you know, we were willing to spend the money and make that and do that correctly the first time. And they were actually wonderful and trained me. So then we were able to leverage that initial jobs to be done to roll through and do jobs to be done several other times with, you know, the same level of strategic buy-in, which was great. So those are the 5 steps that I usually go through. And I did want to take a second to thank the Rewired Group for their support with jobs to be done. They were amazing. If you need, you know, to hear another voice about jobs to be done or considering a consultant, I highly recommend you check them out. They also have some great resources on how to do it yourself. So that is all I had to share today, sort of going through that experience from, you know, starting with personas, adding in that layer of jobs to be done, and finishing with bringing that to life through the actual journey on the product. I really hope that some of you are considering doing this kind of endeavor in your own companies. I'm happy to talk about it and talk about my experiences in more depth, and also, you know, give recommendations where I can, because every case is unique. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to be in touch. And now I will go into the questions and take some questions.
Thanks so much, Claire. This is awesome. I don't know if you can see the questions.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, cool.
I can. Great. So I see Julia asked the question, do you have any advice on how to persuade your organization's leadership to expand their user research team from 1 to 2, or hopefully more? Yes. So this is something that I've had to go through in the last several years. I think there's no magic bullet. Honestly, I think it comes over time, and it comes through seeing success and doing projects like this and seeing the company shift direction based on research, I think really helps make the case that this is something of value and this is something that we can and should bring to the table in a greater fashion. So, this is something that I'm constantly advocating for, and I'm constantly doing a check for myself to see, okay, how are we doing? How is the team? Do we need more resources? If so, what does that look like? Is that a consultant? Is that we have a contractor who helps do a lot of the analysis for us so that that frees up some of my time and stuff like that. So there are workarounds. But I think it's just a constant effort of advocacy and making sure that you have really high quality output that influences the business strategy to move it forward so that it sort of makes the case for you. So I hope that answers your question. Lorraine asks, are jobs to be done different from tasks? I'm not sure how you're defining tasks in this case, but I think jobs to be done is a little bit, tasks to me, at least how I understand it, just through reading this, is, you want to accomplish something, you do something. It loses a little bit of the emotional component to that. And so I think jobs to be done does a really good job of bringing in other factors. So you could have social jobs to be done or social factors that really impact how people decide what they want to do and accomplish the things that they want to in their lives. Or it could be based on some emotional pull from some experience that happened previously. So it's a little less transactional and a little bit more focused on the nuance of the human and bringing in some of those other factors besides direct cause and effect. Michelle asked, at what stage of the product development would you recommend using this framework, and when is it the most effective? I think that your company needs to be at a certain level of maturity, and in our case, they were kind of asking for it. They were asking for some way to better understand the users in a more holistic way, and so I leveraged that existing desire to, spin up this conversation of, oh, can we do something bigger? Can we do personas? So that goes again back to my recommendation around strategic buy-in. So making sure that you have interest from individuals to continue that particular piece of work and that they would actually use that at the end of the day to change things. And then she asked a follow-up question, how do you persuade those who love user stories but don't believe in jobs to be done? User stories and jobs to be done can often play hand in hand, and there are some people, I believe it's Alan Clement, who frames job stories as being very similar to user stories. So a lot of that to me is kind of semantics. I think you can leverage either to accomplish the same end goal. So I'm not sure exactly how I feel about that. I have a lot of mixed feelings about some of the terminology that's used in jobs to be done and elsewhere in product development experience. So, I think jobs to be done really roots it in real people, and it roots it in what their situation is and what they're trying to get out of that situation. So that's why I particularly like jobs to be done. Great. So Derek asked, did customer interviews inform the personas in the first place? So yes. Remember, so for those of you who are here from the beginning, we actually did personas essentially twice. So the first time was based on qualitative interviews, and it really gave us a sense of how people talk about learning and what the spectrum of belief in learning could be. And from there, we were able to develop a market segmentation survey to send out to users based on those interviews and also some of our hypotheses as to what are key drivers for whether or not someone believes in learning or uses learning on a regular basis. And that was able to help frame the personas and that start that ball rolling. Great question. So Jarno, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but Jarno asked, I would guess Udemy can help in countless jobs to be done. How do you decide on them? Yes, that is a very big question. The challenge, and I guess this is true across most of UX research, is that it's a huge amount is art. It is less science. And so I think when we were going through the jobs to be done discussion, it was a balance. You know, we actually had a programmer in the room who built a computer model to try and predict what our jobs to be done would be. And we did not end up using the ones that he selected or that he thought were appropriate. You know, that his was one of the top 3 consideration sets, but we ended up, because of our belief in the business and how we think that works and our understanding of the users, ended up choosing a different set of jobs to be done. So I think it's something that you kind of can only understand as you go through the process of understanding, okay, what are the possible solution sets? And then you can do things once you have decided on that solution set to figure out, okay, which one do you want to prioritize? So we do a lot of what I call sizing surveys. So trying to understand if you extrapolate these jobs to be done, this self-perception to a larger population, how does, you know, what does that look like? What does that distribution look like? And so that helps us focus the conversation a little bit more. So the next question comes from Eva, and she's asking, can you talk about the difference between defining the job to be done versus the journey? And do you create the job maps first or move directly into a journey? So jobs to be done is focusing on more of the situation. That's what I like about jobs to be done. It takes a step back from who the person is, and looks very explicitly at their situation and where they're trying to go. So that can happen on your product, or it can happen through a series of other products. And so that's how those two things are distinct. You know, for some jobs to be done for Udemy, someone may choose a podcast, or they may choose an app, or they may choose, you know, to read the newspaper or something like that. Or they could turn to a hardcover book. And so their journey with whatever product they choose based on that jobs to be done will look very different than their journey with us. And so it's kind of that next layer down, like I was mentioning before. And with respect to, do you create the job maps first or move directly into a journey? We didn't actually do formal job maps as the output for our jobs to be done. We kept it a lot more informal than that. And moved into the journey after sort of working through that and figuring out which ones we wanted to focus on. So Clara said very correctly, by starting with a persona, you seem to be missing the opportunity of segmenting around unmet needs. Jobs and outcomes are both demographic agnostic, so why would you still use segment your users this way? Do you think you're missing out on potential segments? I think that's always a possibility. I think it's impossible to know all of the segments you could ever have. I think for us, the demographics was actually only a very small portion of the personas. It was largely based on attitudes and behaviors around learning, which tend to be demographic agnostic. We actually, you know, did sizing surveys internationally and found very similar types of people. And I think there are some that are unique to different demographics based on, you know, the situations that they find themselves in and their existing educational structures in those countries and things like that. And so that's something we're definitely exploring, but that's kind of a known bias or a known missing quantity. So I think you're right. I think we are probably missing some segments, but you have to focus somewhere, and we can't always design for everything and everyone, because that's where, you know, it ends up being a very, you know, bland product. So that's Acknowledge, yes, you are correct. And eventually we'll be getting towards, what are those unmet needs? Michelle asked 2 questions. So first, in the journey map, how did you deal with analytics and conversion data, and was this important to your stakeholder buy-in? So we actually, for these journey maps, did not integrate analytics data or site data. You can, you don't have to. We were focused more on user sentiment at different points in the journey, and then we can always go back and layer on those analytics data, but we're continuing the thread of trying to build up qualitative research as being something that's hugely valuable and important. And so we focus mostly on the sentiments during different points of the journey and what they're trying to accomplish at those different moments. And then her second question was, how did you use and share this within your organization? So the framework came together actually over the course of about a year and a half. So it was very much a slow drip campaign. For personas, we did a big splash roadshow, all hands presentations, included clips and sent those around and tried to really immerse people in those because that was the first big piece that we ever did. For jobs to be done, we actually took it a less overt route and actually did something really fun, which was we worked with one of our team members on customer support who's an artist, and she created cartoon strips for us that we would put into the bathrooms for people to read. We called them the installments, and that gave them an opportunity, gave this sort of slow diffusion of understanding of what are those jobs to be done, which I think are actually well suited to something like cartoon strips, because it's panel by panel. Here's where they were. Here's what happened. For customer journeys, we ended up doing a similar big roadshow and actually, blew up these giant, beautiful customer journeys that we worked with a designer to create, and those were, placed all around the office. So we use a bunch of different methodologies to disseminate and share the research that we've done. You can make it fun. You should make it fun. Derek wants to know, from a competition standpoint, how did defining personas differently lead to seeing new sources of competition? And how did this lead to new product development or highlighting features in a new way? I don't believe any one of these pieces was particularly, we are constantly looking at competitors, I guess I'll say it that way. And we know that in the learning space, you can define competitors in a number of different ways. You could consider Netflix a competitor for somebody's time. You could consider YouTube a competitor. You can consider a newspaper a competitor. So we know that there's a variety of different ways that you can frame competition. And so we're constantly looking at those. And I don't know if personas or jobs to be done or journeys really highlighted those more, but it's just something that's continually on our mind. Aaron asked the question, you mentioned in the reality check of, am I doing this research for the right reasons? And what problems is this approach designed to solve? So I think if I'm understanding you correctly, so the reason I do that gut check for myself is because I want to make sure that I am not doing it just because it seems cool, and I'm also doing it because there's a true business need. And so that ties in with, do I have stakeholder buy-in? I've done projects where I did it because, I saw a need and I just kind of took it and ran and didn't really bring in my stakeholders and all of that. And it ended up falling a little bit flat. No one ended up really using the data. And so I make sure that I have that buy-in. There is someone who's going to use the data, and I'm doing it because there is that larger business need. So I hope I understood you, and I hope that answers your question. So we have probably about another 5 minutes, and I'll try and get through as many as I can in that time. Cindy asked, how have the product and the design teams used the output of the foundational research? So they do. They use it all the time. We actually, in some cases, have embedded some of those components, so some of the persona and jobs to be done and journey components, directly into our product, which is really cool. And it's really helping us run and think more critically about, are we solving the needs for the people that we think we're solving them for, and are we solving the correct needs? So I think it's something that we use every day, and it's something that people constantly refer back to. And we as a research team, going back to how do you share that information, are constantly trying to reinforce this, both with new employees, but also bring it back to people periodically, so that it's a constant reminder of, are we designing for the right people and for their discrete situations. Emily asks, what kinds of research did you do to capture the different attitudinal, situational, and experiential qualitative data? A lot of the qualitative research that went into all of these pieces were either phone interviews or remote screen share, talk aloud kind of interviews. So that's mostly what we've based this off of. We have a very global product, and thinking through resource allocation and assessment, we don't always have the largest budget to go everywhere. So we leverage a lot of remote research options so that we can try and get the widest array of participants and experiences while still, keeping the budget effective. So largely relied on interviews in a variety of forms. Muriel says, we have been trying to adopt the Jobs to be Done framework. Awesome. And now we have a first set of jobs, but at what level did you define them to be meaningful for product? And she also asked, how did you quantify the jobs to be done? So I'm not sure if I fully understood the first question. I think the jobs to be done, again, is more art than science. And it's about thinking through what are the key drivers for a person's situation and how they will be successful to achieve their sense of progress. So in theory, that set of jobs should be at a level where it can be impactful for your company, because you're really focused on their situation and how they want to get out of their situation, largely. In terms of quantifying them, once we ended up doing, 3 days of synthesis as a cross-functional stakeholder group to sort of figure this all out. And after that, their big question was, okay, what now? And so I took that opportunity to say, well, let's focus this conversation even further and decide, we can't solve all of the jobs. So which are the highest impact ones to solve? And went through and did a sizing survey. So we basically laid out, and I'm going to do a blog post on this hopefully soon. We sort of wrote survey options and scales to reflect the different jobs to be done and the different dimensions off of which we were building our framework, and had people self-select into those. And we actually did that as an iterative process, and actually went back to some of the people that we had interviewed with our jobs to be done participants, and had them go through that survey out loud with us, so that they could talk through how they were making their decisions in this survey to help us understand their frame of reference, to make sure that our perception of their situation and jobs was the same as theirs. So that's how we ended up quantifying, and then we rolled that out to a larger set of individuals. Vinay asked, when you have a business-to-business scenario, great question, do you think the attitudinal layer has a lot of weight rather than the situational force, because the people who hire this product are not the ones who use it? And did you have a chance to do jobs to be done on instructors? So I'll answer the second one first. Yes, we have done jobs to be done on instructors. And to B2B, yes, that is a very interesting nuance. And you can actually do jobs to be done for all of the layers of that. So we have a business-to-business product at Udemy as well. It's called Udemy for Business. And we have done jobs to be done, or personas, for the administrators or the people who buy the product, as well as the learners, because understanding those nuances and also understanding where the gap is between those two people can reveal a lot about how and why your product is being used, and people are or are not renewing that product. So I think you should do, if you're going in a B2B context, are considering doing jobs to be done, I would do both the administrators or the purchasers as well as the actual end users. So that would be my recommendation. It's very interesting, fascinating. Juan Carlos asks, are there any other foundational research frameworks on the table for consideration? If so, what were they? Something that we have considered and have gone back and forth on is actually a service map instead of a journey map. So probably use one or the other. We haven't ended up using it because it's significantly more work in some cases. So at the time that we built this framework, and it was also not super applicable for the student case, we thought. So, you know, that's something that's still in consideration, and we may end up evolving this and decide, you know, the journey map is not correct, let's do a service map instead, or maybe there's something else entirely that we haven't thought of. So, you know, I think research is always an iterative process, and that may be something that we will swap out in the future. We'll see. Cindy wanted to ask, how many users did you reach out to conclude the definition of personas? So that was very iterative. The survey was several thousand, and then we ended up talking to probably 20 or 30 users to sort of validate those in a qualitative sense. And I have time for one more question. And I am going to go with, there's several of them I know, and I'm sorry I won't be able to get to everything. Emily asked, where does the sentiment on user journeys come from, and how do you know what people feel at different points on the happy or unhappy scale? So you can do this in a couple of ways. You can do this as where people actually, you can ask, okay, how would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5? We actually did it as an approximation, and also layered on things other than just happy and sad, but things like anxious or frustrated or ecstatic or joyful or, you know, any apathetic, things that add a little bit of nuance to that as well. So that's how we did that. And great.
This is so great, Claire. Thanks so much. I mean, that's amazing presentation, and also all these answers that, you know, I'm sure is going to help everybody here. So just a heads up again that, you know, we are going to share the recording of this video with everyone by email in a couple of days. And yeah, thanks again, Claire. This was
thank you, and thanks everyone for your great questions. I really appreciate it. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have additional questions or want to talk through your process of creating a foundational research framework.
Awesome. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.